Imagine an itch, but not just any itch. An itch so relentless, so constant, that it takes over your life.
It disrupts your sleep, your work, everything.
Yeah, it makes it hard to focus on anything else.
That's the reality for millions of people living with chronic hives.
And today we're taking a deep dive into the history of chronic hives research,
We're going to journey through a century of discoveries
from the 1950s all the way to today.
to see how our understanding of this condition has evolved.
You might be surprised to learn that in some cases it's actually the body's own immune system that's causing the problem.
It's true. The journey from mystery to targeted treatments has been a long one, and each decade has brought breakthroughs.
So let's start back in the 1950s.
Back then, chronic hives were a real puzzle. Doctors often just lumped them in with allergies.
Yeah, treatments were limited and the science was still pretty murky.
But two key studies in the 50s really changed everything.
Okay, so picture the 1950s. Treatments were limited, the science was murky. But in 1952, Shelley and Ronsley make a huge discovery.
They proved that histamine, the thing that makes us itch, was directly connected to those hives.
Like finding the cause of the fire, not just putting out the flame.
Exactly. It was a major breakthrough that validated antihistamines as a real treatment.
Not just a temporary Band-Aid.
Right. But then in 1955, Sulzberger and Baer added another layer to the puzzle.
Their research suggested that things like allergies
And environmental factors.
could actually trigger chronic hives.
So suddenly doctors started asking patients, what are your triggers?
It was a move towards personalized medicine, even back then.
Absolutely. It was a huge step forward in understanding the complexity of chronic hives.
So the 1950s laid the groundwork. But the 1960s got researchers thinking.
Thinking about why these mast cells, the ones that release histamine, are going haywire in the first place.
Right, like what's making them so overreactive?
It was a shift from just treating symptoms to trying to understand the underlying mechanisms.
So it wasn't just about what you were allergic to.
But how your body was actually reacting to those triggers.
And in 1962, Ring and Dorsch found that mast cells in people with chronic hives acted differently.
They were like oversensitive alarms going off at the slightest provocation.
So it wasn't just an allergic reaction. There was something going on with the mast cells themselves.
And then in 1964, Champion's study revealed something else really important.
That chronic hives weren't just a short-term annoyance.
They could last for years.
Years. This was huge because it showed researchers that they needed to find long-term solutions.
Not just quick fixes, we needed to really understand what was going on and develop treatments that could provide lasting relief.
So chronic hives were finally being recognized as a serious long-term condition.
A condition that could really impact people's lives. But there was still so much to learn.
Right, the mystery was far from solved.
Exactly. But the 1970s brought a push for clarity. Doctors wanted better ways to define and treat chronic hives.
They needed a more systematic approach.
Think of it like creating a roadmap.
A roadmap for diagnosis and treatment.
In 1973, Greaves and Davies came up with specific criteria for diagnosing chronic hives.
So finally, some clear guidelines.
This was important because it distinguished chronic hives from other skin conditions.
And that led to more accurate diagnoses and more consistent treatment.
Right. No more guesswork. And then in the mid-70s, something else happened that was a real game changer.
The arrival of second-generation antihistamines.
These were revolutionary because they didn't make people drowsy.
Finally, relief without feeling foggy.
But even with better treatments, the mystery of chronic hives was far from solved. It was like having a few pieces of the puzzle.
But the bigger picture was still blurry.
And the 1980s would bring a truly groundbreaking discovery that would change everything.
The 1980s were about uncovering a shocking twist. Could chronic hives actually be an autoimmune disease?
Meaning the body is attacking itself?
Exactly. It was a revolutionary idea.
And there was evidence to back it up. In 1985, Fiebiger and Moorer found that some people with chronic hives had antibodies that were targeting their own mast cells.
So their immune system was actually attacking the cells responsible for releasing histamine.
It was like discovering a traitor within the ranks. It was a huge shift in thinking. Before, we mostly focused on, external triggers like allergies.
Right.
But now the immune system itself was a suspect.
It was like realizing the enemy was within.
And Lawler and Black's study in 1987 really backed up this idea.
They show that these antibodies could actually trigger histamine release.
It was a key piece of the puzzle.
So by the end of the 80s, we had this whole new understanding of chronic hives.
We were starting to see the bigger picture.
But the story doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
The 1990s were about confirming this autoimmune connection and taking it a step further.
Exactly. The 90s were all about nailing down the specific.
Getting into the nitty-gritty.
In 1993, Hyde and his team made a major breakthrough.
They identified the exact antibody responsible for triggering those mast cells.
In many chronic hives cases.
Wow, so no more guessing games.
Right. We knew exactly who the culprit was.
But how do you actually diagnose this?
Well, just a couple of years later, in 1995, Grattan's team came up with a simple skin test.
A skin test?
Yeah, to diagnose autoimmune urticaria.
So doctors could finally identify patients who would benefit from treatments that target the immune system.
Exactly. It was a game changer.
It's like having a roadmap instead of wandering in the dark.
That's a great way to put it.
So the 90s were about identifying the problem, but the 2000s were about finding solutions.
The 2000s were a time of incredible innovation.
Tell me about some of the major breakthroughs in treatment during that time.
Well, one of the biggest advances was the introduction of omalizumab.
Omalizumab?
Yeah, it's a biologic therapy that specifically targets IgE.
Okay, and what's IgE?
IgE is a key player in both allergic and autoimmune responses.
So by blocking IgE, you could potentially stop hives at the source.
That's the idea. It's a whole new way of thinking about treatment.
Instead of just blocking histamine after it's released, you're preventing it from being released in the first place.
Exactly. And it was a game changer for people with severe chronic hives who hadn't found relief from other treatments.
It gave them new hope.
Absolutely.
Right.
But the 2000s also saw a shift in focus.
In what way?
Researchers started paying more attention to the impact of chronic hives on people's quality of life.
It's not just about the physical symptoms.
No, it's not. Chronic hives can affect your sleep, your work, your relationships, everything.
It can really take over your life.
And that's why it's so important to treat it effectively.
This was a crucial realization because it highlighted the need for treatments that addressed the whole person.
Not just the rash.
Right, treating the person, not just the disease.
Exactly. And that leads us to the 2010s, where the focus shifted towards personalized medicine.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Well, researchers started digging deeper into the different types of chronic hives.
Trying to understand why some people respond to certain treatments while others don't.
Exactly. It's
Right.
not a one-size-fits-all condition.
So it's not just about finding a cure for chronic hives.
It's about finding the right cure for each person.
Fascinating.
Hmm.
But before we jump into the 2010s, let's take a quick pause.
Sounds good.
When we come back, we'll explore the latest research and what the future holds for chronic hives treatment. We're back and ready to dive into the 2010s and 2020s, where chronic hives research has really taken off.
The 2010s brought this wave of new biologics, like gilizumab.
Like gilizumab.
It's even more effective than omalizumab for some people.
Oh, it's like they took a good thing and made it even better.
Exactly. But it's not just about improving existing treatments.
Right.
It's about understanding why those treatments work for some and not for others.
And that's where the idea of endotypes comes in.
Yeah, researchers started realizing that chronic hives aren't one size fits all.
There are different underlying mechanisms driving the disease in each person,
Exactly. Different subtypes of chronic hives.
each with its own unique cause, and therefore needing its own specific treatment approach.
Exactly.
That's personalized medicine at its best.
Ab-
But what about prevention? Can we stop chronic hives before they even start?
That's the holy grail. And research is moving in that direction.
Tell me more about that.
One really exciting area is the use of biomarkers
Biomarkers.
to predict and potentially prevent flare-ups.
So if we can identify those early warning signs,
We might be able to adjust treatment or lifestyle factors to stop hives in their tracks.
wow, that would be incredible.
It would be a game changer for millions of people.
Absolutely.
But even without a cure,
Right.
we've come a long way in understanding and treating chronic hives.
From a mysterious ailment to a condition with targeted treatments.
It's remarkable.
It really is.
All right.
And it's all thanks to those dedicated researchers.
And the brave patients who participated in those clinical trials.
Absolutely. So for anyone out there struggling with chronic hives,
There is hope.
keep learning, keep advocating for yourself.
Don't give up.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone.
Millions of people around the world share this condition, and researchers are working tirelessly to find better solutions.
That's the beauty of science. It's a constant journey of discovery.
And we're getting closer and closer to a future where chronic hives no longer control people's lives.
I love that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into a century of chronic hives research, it's worth thinking about what the next chapter holds.
What new breakthroughs await us?
What mysteries remain to be solved?
That's the exciting thing about science. There's always more to learn. More to discover
Yeah.
and more to hope for. So stay curious, stay informed, and let's see what the future holds for chronic hives treatment.
And beyond.